companies that have underperformed, that are unloved by the market, companies with depressed valuations, companies with a lot of cash on their balance sheet, and companies that are generating cash. That's how I think about a zombie company. Smaller companies generally attract fewer investors. Companies that aren't growing tend to attract fewer investors, and companies that are not maximizing their balance sheets, they tend to not do well either, and especially companies with a lot of cash that are controlled by shareholder or founder and so forth. Those are kind of off limits to activist investors. So you see companies like that are just like, you're like, what is going on here? And the one that I initially focused on was Zoom Communications, because this is a big company. I mean, they have a $25 billion enterprise value, and they have about $8 billion in net cash, and they generate like $2 billion of free cash flow. So like, it's just shocking. And they buy back stock, but not that much, and it hasn't really been that accretive for them to do that. And so they should very seriously consider something much more accretive, like buying Bitcoin on their balance sheet.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Stephan Livera podcast, brought to you by Bold. For American listeners, you can buy Bitcoin over at getbold.io. Now, joining me today is Eric Semler. Eric is the chairman of Semler Scientific, and many of you may know this is a company who has adopted the Bitcoin strategy, and I'm really excited to chat a bit about this. So first of all, welcome to the show, Eric.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
So Eric, let's start with a little bit of a background on your company journey before we get into the Bitcoin stuff. So, for people who aren't familiar, tell us a little bit about how Semler Scientific got started.
Sure. Semler Scientific was started about 20 years ago. It's a medical device and software business that my father, Herbert Semler, who is no longer involved in the company, but was the founder and a great pioneer and visionary in the cardiovascular space. My dad is living in Portland at age 96, so he's still going strong, coming up with ideas like every other week. But right. It's how I grew up, with a father that was always a great cardiologist, but always super inventive. And he invented some of the earliest cardiac monitoring devices back in the late 60s, and had some amazing products while he practiced medicine. Anyway, Semler Scientific was started 20 years ago. I was one of the primary investors in it to seed it. And about 10 years ago, it went public and had an amazing run with this one device that it has called QuantaFlo. QuantaFlo is a pretty simple screening device that uses an infrared sensor to screen people for peripheral artery disease. Can do other things as well, but it's been used for screening people for peripheral artery disease, which is a silent killer. About half the people who have peripheral artery disease, PAD, don't know they have it. They're asymptomatic. So it's really important to screen for it. If they do have it, they have a much higher probability of having heart disease, a stroke, amputations. There's hundreds of thousands of amputations a year that, don't need to happen, if people can be screened for this. So it's a preventative type of procedure to help people avoid getting very serious problems down the road. And there's been some research done on what type of savings PAD screening has provided, and there's estimates as high as like $400 billion. So there's a real need for this device. It's saved hundreds of thousands of lives, and it unfortunately it disproportionately affects Black men, women, and Hispanics. So it's a really value added device. There's really no viable alternative. It takes about 2 to 4 minutes to do this procedure in a doctor's office. You put the device on 2 fingers and 2 toes, and then within a few minutes you can come up with you can help in the diagnosis of PAD.
I see.
So that's what Semler Scientific does.
Yeah. And then are there other products, or that's the main one?
That's been the main one. It's been a very successful product. At one point our stock was had a valuation of over $1 billion just based on the success of this product. But we have another application, a much bigger one actually, for heart disease, heart dysfunction. It's called. It's with the FDA awaiting approval, and you'd use the same device, slightly different way. A tweak to the software, and it could also help in the screening of people with asymptomatic heart disease. So
I see.
it's a potentially very big universe of people. We mentioned this on our last earnings call, but we are also finding other potential products. We're in the early stages of doing some really interesting things that hopefully we'll be able to tell you more about soon. But we're seeing some good green shoots in another area that we've been developing.
Great. Okay. Well, yeah, look, I'd love to hear a little bit about your Bitcoin story as well, in terms of how you came across this idea. And yeah, if you could explain a little bit from that. Yeah. Let's just start with how you came across this idea. What was your first impression of Bitcoin?
I first was exposed to it in like 2013, I would say. I was on an investor trip. My background is most of my career, I've been a investor in technology and media and public companies. And I was visiting Wences Caceres, his office in Palo Alto back in 2013. I didn't know who he was, and I don't think any of the other investors on the trip knew who he was. And he told us the story, and it was convincing, but still not something that I kind of delved into too much, because my focus was being a public, investing in public companies. But I always wanted to know what was coming down the pipe, and Bitcoin sounded interesting, but not something that I jumped into. I wish I had, but it wasn't really my focus. I was really in my fund. I really just focused on public companies. A few years later, I'd say 2017, I decided to buy my first Bitcoin. I think I was influenced a lot by Tom Lee, who's a close friend of mine. He runs Fundstrat. He's been
Yeah.
a phenomenal analyst in areas that I follow. And I'm on the board of Fundstrat. So, he and I have a really long relationship, and I, value Tom's advice. And he was very early in it, with public investors and pushing it hard. And I also have a friend in the venture capital business named Jim Robinson. He runs a fund called RRE. He's been very successful. He's a really early investor in crypto. And he was also somebody who was very influential to me. And so as a result of guys like that and just talking to him, I slowly evolved into believing in Bitcoin. And I've always been kind of an outside the box contrarian investor. And so it kind of fit into my framework of thinking. And it's been a relatively evolutionary process for me. I'd say that the clincher really wasn't that long ago. It was with the institutionalization of Bitcoin, and just seeing how it was being adopted and kind of cemented as a potential store of value. And that appealed to me. And I like most people who become enamored with Bitcoin. Once you're over the hump, you just get
Really
more and more
dive
into
in.
it.
Yeah.
Totally.
So I guess, would you say fair to say from, let's say, 2017, 2018, in that sort of era with Tom Lee, you sort of personally were convicted in Bitcoin, or personally had a conviction about where Bitcoin was going, but at the company level, that was a later story. So can you explain maybe the difference for people?
Yeah,
there?
let me clarify that, because most of my career, I've just been an investor in public companies, and Semler Scientific was not something I was very focused on or involved in. It's a healthcare business. That's not something I invested in. It was a passive investment for me. About 2 years ago, the company was facing some headwinds regulatorily with the PAD product. And so I decided to get involved. I became an activist, really, in the company, ironically. My father was no longer involved, but I decided that I should play a more active role in the business and trying to fix it and set it on a better path. And I had done that in my career previously with other companies. I've gone on public company boards and tried to affect change and maximize shareholder value when I have investments in things that weren't working very well. And I kind of threw up my hands and just said, if they can't fix it, I got to get involved. And so that was one of these situations. So I'm relatively new to Semler Scientific. I just got involved 2 years ago, went on the board, reconstituted the board. It's now myself and one of the other large investors, Will Chang, who's been a longtime investor in the company. Doug Murphy-Katorian is the CEO, also has a large position. And the three of us, own over 30% of the company, or we did when I first got involved. It's been diluted by our ATM process a little bit, but we still have a significant shareholder, position in the company. So that's how I got involved. And when I first went on the board, I was just thinking two things. Should we buy back stock or should we buy another company in the medical business? And we had our stock had traded to a level where half of our market cap, not quite half, but almost, was in cash. And that kind of has a similarity to MicroStrategy or strategy in August of 2020. There's a kind of a parallel there. And I wasn't really aware of that. I was just focused on, we got to find something to buy with a great return, or we got to buy back stock. Buying back stock didn't make that much sense because our stock didn't trade very well. We weren't getting any credit for our cash, and it didn't really make a lot of sense. It was pretty, unclear whether that was a great thing to do. And there seemed to be more optionality using our cash to buy another company. We looked at dozens of companies. We got very serious with a lot of them. Just everything was kind of a black box. It was really hard to get, real conviction in any of that. And while this was happening, I was, like a lot of people, listening to Michael Saylor talk about this Bitcoin Treasury strategy. I frankly didn't understand how sophisticated the financial engineering around it was. I just thought it was amazing that he was taking his cash to buy Bitcoin and how well Bitcoin was doing. And that was really interesting to me. And I think I was also scratching my head as to, why hasn't anybody else tried to do this? Tesla bought some Bitcoin and Block, but, why isn't anyone pursuing this Bitcoin Treasury strategy? And when he started talking about zombie companies and I knew he was talking to me, he was talking to our board. We were a classic zombie company, and he was saying there are thousands of these. And being a public market investor who I happen to be interested in these companies because I like to invest in things that are kind of contrarian or underfollowed. And so I knew a lot about these zombie companies. I was investing in some of them, and they were frustrating as hell to own these stocks. And we were one of them. And so it had a particularly strong hit a chord for me. And so I reached out to him through Tom Lee, and he was incredibly helpful and great mentor through this process, and super excited that we were doing it, which shows you the kind of the altruistic type of person he is, especially for Bitcoin. And Michael really became a great proponent and cheerleader of what we were doing. And so I went to our board and I had said, you guys got to listen to Michael Saylor. You got to listen to these podcasts. Let me know what you think. They didn't have I don't think they had a lot of experience, investing in Bitcoin, and didn't have a full understanding of it. But I think they had this kind of open-mindedness that you need, that most boards probably don't have. And they were willing to kind of consider it. And we were all just exhausted and frustrated by this going nowhere with our cash, and, no acquisitions out there. And so, they surprised me, frankly, and said, "Hey, Eric, I think this is a great idea. Let's pursue it." And I was like, "Wow, okay." So we decided to pursue the Bitcoin Treasury strategy back in May of last May 24. So it's been about 9-10 months since we started doing this. It wasn't as easy as I thought in terms of just onboarding. There's a lot of legal, accounting, there's just a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy you kind of got to deal with. Then the SEC at that time was, not the easiest to convince to let us go do this. So there was a lot of back and forth with the SEC, a lot of questions about why we were doing this and and they kind of made it, they prolonged that kind of approval process. So it took us a little while to get out there and to buy Bitcoin. As soon as we bought Bitcoin, it went down about 25%. So we took most of the cash we had to buy Bitcoin, most of the cash on our balance sheet at that time, and then it kind of plunged in 25%. Which, if you're new to this strategy and
It'll be
you've
hard,
got
yeah.
board members who've never done, who haven't been following Bitcoin that closely, you wonder, you start to wonder, like, how are they going to react? And it was amazing. They just wanted to buy more. Their conviction was tested. Mine was too. And
Fantastic,
we
yeah.
just kept buying. And so we started with 60 million. Then we got up to our Bitcoin was valued at over 300 million until this recent drawdown. But we have almost 3,200 Bitcoin, 3,192. And we're actually the 10th largest corporate holder of Bitcoin, which is proud of that. We're the largest, obviously the largest healthcare. We're the only healthcare oriented business that has a treasury reserve strategy, a Bitcoin treasury reserve
Yeah.
strategy.
And so I guess I'm curious then, when you were going through that big, that drawdown now, as you mentioned before, you had been in the personal sense in Bitcoin. So I guess you'd already kind of been through at least a little bit, you had been through a couple of these big drawdown cycles.
Yeah.
And so I guess on your side, you were probably okay, right? But what was it like trying to talk to, your counterparts on the board or other, relevant stakeholders in the business?
First of all, our stakeholders, like our shareholders, were very supportive in a way. I think our shareholder base turned over pretty quickly and became mostly Bitcoin focused investors. And so we got very little pushback there. The board members, the other board members, just were amazing. They really were not pointing fingers, were not, questioning what we were doing. We were all in, just wanting to own more Bitcoin. And part of that was to get this ATM strategy going, where we would sell shares. And that I referred to earlier, the SEC just made that a much longer process than it needed to be. So, as Bitcoin was falling, we're just sitting there waiting for the SEC to get back to us, and they just dragged their feet, which was really frustrating. But once we got that, we got back in there right away, and we were able to buy several hundred million of Bitcoin, which was, just all along the boards has just gotten like myself, once you personally kind of adopt the Bitcoin standard, our board is all in, and they just want to own more and more Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I also find it interesting how the strategy evolved over time, right? Because when Michael Saylor first came out with this strategy, it was just more like buy Bitcoin with your cash, right? It wasn't this kind of strategy. It's evolved obviously over time, and it's become more about, actually, these public companies, they have access to equity financing and debt financing options that normal people and private companies don't have. And so then this kind of idea of equity ATM, issuing shares to buy Bitcoin, this kind of strategy, came up. And so can you talk us through that shift for you, like going from just thinking, okay, I'm just going to buy Bitcoin with the cash we have, with our free cash flow, or just the cash on hand that we have, versus I'm actually going to start doing the more quote unquote financial engineering, or this kind of equity ATM, or issuing debt to buy Bitcoin?
Right. My background is in finance and investing, so I saw the logic in the latter strategy and trying to, borrow money to buy Bitcoin to increase our returns and to own more Bitcoin. At the end of the day, the financial engineering strategy is interesting to me, and but at the end of the day, my goal and our goal as a company is to own more Bitcoin and to view it as a great investment that's going to deliver a huge return to us. And that's first and foremost. And whether we're trading at a multiple to our Bitcoin or we're trading at the value of our Bitcoin, I'm comfortable with that because I believe so strongly in the upside of Bitcoin that I'm good with that. But I do see merit in borrowing money to buy Bitcoin. As a result of our balance sheet now, we have $100 million of convertible debt on our balance sheet. So we're now the most levered play on Bitcoin, which when Bitcoin's going down doesn't feel so great. But when Bitcoin's going up, we should outperform. We should outperform Bitcoin because of our leverage, because of the principles of finance. And so we're set up really well now to outperform Bitcoin, we hope, and to really have very, very high outsized returns if there is if there's continued appreciation in Bitcoin. And that's just finance. So I don't think of that as necessarily, doing anything funny, trying to take advantage of volatility, anything like that. I'm just thinking I want to invest in Bitcoin because it's a great store of value.
Right. You just want more exposure to this thing. Yeah. Back to the show in a moment. This show brought to you by CoinKite.com, the creators of the best Bitcoin hardware security devices, such as the Cold Card Mark IV and the new Cold Card Q. Now, we use Bitcoin hardware security devices to keep our keys offline, our private keys offline. Now, the way these work is you can do that setup, write down your 12 or 24 words on the seed word cards, and keep that secure. Now, you can use this device to interact with the Bitcoin network using software such as Sparrow Wallet, Electrum, or Vector Desktop, or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now, you have a range of security features that you can use with these devices, such as passphrases, you can use seed XOR, or my favorite is multi-signature. Now, if you're starting in a basic way, just start with the device and the USB-C cable, plug it directly to the computer and use it that way, and then later improve your setup. But I believe these devices are great at helping secure your coins, especially as you start to migrate up into multi-signature security. But don't be disheartened or don't be scared away. They are accessible, and I think you actually do learn about Bitcoin in the process. So to get yours, go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get a discount on your cold card. This episode brought to you by Galloy. They are building banking software for the Bitcoin age. So if you are with a bank, a fintech, or a startup looking to offer some kind of Bitcoin product, whether that is a Bitcoin collateralized loan, deposit accounts, or payments, Galloy can help you. Their latest product is called Lana. It is a loans management platform, and you can use this to come to market quickly and offer a loans or Bitcoin collateralized lending product for your customers. Now, Galloy have a lot of experience in the space. They started with Blink Wallet in 2020, and they've since grown this to become a community favorite over time. And so they have a lot of experience making things work in a secure, reliable, and scalable way. So if you need assistance coming to market quickly with a Bitcoin banking product, such as lending or deposits or payments, talk to the team at Galloy. You can email them. The email is biz@galloy.io, or go to the website galloy.io. And now back to the show. So I'm curious then, I've heard as an example in the case of strategy, I've heard Michael explain it like MicroStrategy can be viewed something like a 1.5x or a 2x of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
From Semler Scientific's perspective, what would that number be, at least at current, leverage ratios?
Oh, right. What is it right now as we're speaking? Or actually, we're not trading. It depends how you value our medical business, but I don't think of us as trading at much of a premium. If we can run, I don't really want to run through the numbers because I don't want to get into what we think the value of our medical business is. But we have, right now, I think we have a close to like I want to say like a $350-400 million market value. Okay. And we have $275 million worth of Bitcoin on our balance sheet. So, and we do have debt. And then you have to decide kind of what you think the medical business is worth. But I do not think we're trading at any kind of excessive premium to the value of our Bitcoin. That's just my personal view. Sure. But I don't, it really depends what you would value our medical business at. In terms of what is the right premium, I don't know the answer to that either. And I think that's really something the market over time will decide. There's really two factors from my standpoint as to what justifies the premium. One is the leverage on the upside. If Bitcoin's going up and you're a levered play on Bitcoin, then you should go up more than Bitcoin. That's just my view. And then the other is that there's this dynamic of public investment funds that invest in public companies. A lot of them can only buy stocks. They can't buy the ETF. They can't buy Bitcoin. So there's a scarcity of Bitcoin exposure opportunities for them. And we represent one of those. We're one of the largest corporate holders of Bitcoin, like Strategy. They're obviously, they dwarf us, but there aren't that many in the U.S. public markets. We were only the second U.S. public company to adopt Bitcoin and as a treasury strategy. So there just aren't a lot of alternatives. So that might justify a premium as well. And so I'm comfortable with us trading at a premium. I can't tell you what the appropriate one is. I think that's the market's decision.
Okay, fair enough. And so while we're talking about this kind of concept of the premium, as I guess the way I'm thinking about that and the way I'm hearing people thinking about that is that you should sort of expect in Bitcoin bull markets and bear markets that it would sort of, maybe it kind of expands in the bull cycle and then, on the downside, it contracts during the bear cycle. Is that how you're seeing it also, that this kind of quote unquote premium would do that?
That's fair. I think that's fair. And I think that something you would need to consider too is that, our goal is to own more Bitcoin. So as we own more Bitcoin, the leverage ratio, the amount of leverage to the value of our Bitcoin could change, right? It could go down, or we could borrow more money and it could go up. It'll fluctuate. But so it's hard to say. I don't expect things to stay static. And so, our goal is to own more Bitcoin and to kind of keep that leverage ratio in that 20 to 30% range or lower. So we're not really looking to lever up beyond that. But we would, we believe in the value and the power of leverage owning Bitcoin.
Yeah. And so when it comes to, let's say, structuring the terms, maybe if you could explain a little bit on that, because I guess when people are coming from Bitcoin world or quote unquote crypto world, they might be thinking, oh, what about getting liquidated, right? Because their mental model of it is like, oh, go on to one of the casinos, let's say, and leave a long or leave a short, and you can get wrecked because you get liquidated, this kind of thing. Whereas at the Bitcoin Treasury company level, the public company level, my understanding is it's more like you structure, let's say, a note, and it might be a 5-year note or something like this, and it's not necessarily a liquidation. It's more like, this is the amount you have to repay in 5 years' time or whatever. Can you just explain a little bit of that aspect of structuring the debt?
Sure. Yeah, that was really an important factor for us when we did our convertible in January. We raised $100 million and we structured it so that it would be 5.5 years maturity. So we don't have any obligation to pay back the convertible notes until 2030. And so we're only going to raise debt if it's kind of long-term and durable debt. So there's no put. Sometimes these convertible offerings have a put in a few years, let's say before maturity, where the investors can put the notes back to you. We don't have that feature in ours. So we borrowed. We raised $100 million in the convert market. We used a cap call, which enabled us to have a much higher premium. So the debt doesn't convert into stock until the stock appreciates more than 70% from, I think we were in like this, low 60s when we did the deal. So there's pretty significant room for our stock to go up before they can convert. But the key thing was the durability and the maturity, length of maturity. I think that's super important. And so that gives us a lot of time, helps us go through another cycle in Bitcoin. And, I think that we're really comfortable with that. There's no gun to our head, anytime soon.
Yeah. And I think the other question people might have with these Bitcoin Treasury companies is they might think, well, could this become a really crowded market? And could that be bad for Bitcoin Treasury companies? But I mean, to your point, maybe it's obviously very good to be first, right? Or early, right? It's very good to be MicroStrategy or Semler Scientific because you guys were kind of some of the first cabs off the rank per se. But I'm curious, what's your view on that? Do you think lots of companies should be doing this, or there's only room for a certain number of companies to actually profitably do this?
Yeah, I actually think eventually a lot of companies will do it, and I hope they do. I think it's the responsible thing to do. I really believe that, especially with these zombie companies, it's a fantastic way for them to maximize shareholder return. So I'm hopeful that they will. I'm more of a believer, like Michael Saylor, that uh, all these Bitcoin Treasury strategy companies will lift the value of Bitcoin and will get people focused institutionally on Bitcoin as this fantastic potential store of value and investment. And I just think that that is inevitable. I don't feel that optimistic about it short term. Or medium term, because it's just very difficult for boards to do this. You really need a specific kind of board that where control is very concentrated and ownership is concentrated, where you can have someone who really strongly believes in Bitcoin kind of lead the charge the way I did at Semler Scientific or the way Michael did at strategy. So I think you kind of need that internally. It's very difficult to do when you have a large board and a lot of people, just are there really to maintain the status quo and collect their board check. So I'm not that optimistic, and that's why I've been spending a lot of my time looking at zombie companies to that should potentially and calling them out, frankly, on my X account, why they should be buying Bitcoin with their cash. Companies with a lot of cash that are profitable, that are not growing, haven't performed well in the market, but have this enormous cash hoard and are generating more cash and should really consider, buying Bitcoin and adopting a Bitcoin treasury strategy.
Yeah, so let's talk about zombie companies then. So let's just start with the obvious question, just for listeners who may not know, what is a zombie company?
A zombie company is, I don't know if Michael Saylor coined the term, but he certainly popularized it. And there are these companies, there's a lot of them in the market. They tend to be small and mid cap in size, where they haven't performed well in the market over long periods of time. And they have tended to be companies with really anemic growth, maybe in some cases maybe flatlined, but they have a huge cash balance, and they are generating cash. So it's basically companies that have underperformed, they're unloved by the market, companies with depressed valuations, companies with a lot of cash on their balance sheet, and companies that are generating cash. And that's how I think about a zombie company. They tend to be smaller because smaller companies generally attract fewer investors. Companies that aren't growing tend to attract fewer investors, and companies that are not maximizing their balance sheets tend to be not, unless there are activists who can come in and change the story, they tend to not do well either. And especially companies with a lot of cash that are controlled by shareholder or founder and so forth, those are kind of off limits to activist investors. So you see companies like that are just like, you're like, what is going on here? And the one that I initially focused on was Zoom Communications, because ticker ZM, because this is a big company. I mean, they have a $25 billion enterprise value, and they have about $8 billion in net cash, and they generate, like $2 billion of free cash flow. So like, it's just shocking. And they buy back stock, but not that much. And it hasn't really been that accretive for them to do that. And so they should very seriously consider, something much more creative, like buying Bitcoin on their balance sheet. The company's growing low single digits. It's doesn't seem It's been throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall trying to figure out how they can restart growth, and it doesn't. There's nothing on the horizon that looks like it's going to improve things. Obviously, Zoom's a great brand. It's well known. All of us use Zoom, but it's got a lot of competition now, and it's kind of stuck in a rut. So that's like a really glaring large cap stock that really should pursue this. It's controlled by its founder, Eric Yuan, who is a very savvy technology guy. Obviously, he created Zoom, which is, phenomenal, a phenomenal success story. But he controls the keys to the company. As an activist, you can't really force him to do anything, but you can call it out. You can kind of make him more aware of the potential value of doing this. And I believe on X, he actually started following some of this chatter about it and some of the commentary, which was interesting in itself. But on the flip side, because he controls it and because he has so much influence over the company, he personally, if he could become enamored with Bitcoin and decide maybe it does make a lot of sense for my company. So even though you can't force him to do it, maybe he could come around to it on his own if enough people kind of
Push him on it, yeah.
explain it to him. Maybe they orange pill him. Maybe he's already orange pilled. Maybe he just doesn't believe that it's the right thing to do for his company. But there are companies out there like his where there's a lot of concentrated ownership and control and a lot of cash on the balance sheet, and these companies are ripe for BTC treasury strategy.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point you make that it's. I think it's quite likely that there are, at least in the tech world, I'm sure there are tech CEOs and senior people in the tech world who personally hold Bitcoin, but maybe they just don't think it's right for the company, right? Like, big screaming example is Mark Zuckerberg, right? Apparently he's named one of his goats Bitcoin, right? And he has a very high, I believe, voting because of like the special share type that he has. He actually does have a decent amount of control over Facebook or Meta, but he might be a rare exception in terms of having that level of control at like this size of a company.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. It wouldn't surprise me if he used some of Meta's cash to buy Bitcoin, just the way Elon Musk did at Tesla. And I think that would be super positive and great, and maybe spur others to kind of do the same thing. And that would be great because then there'd just be more demand for Bitcoin, and it would also just would make kind of mainstream traditional investors think, oh, this is kind of okay, like for companies to do this, and then other companies may follow. So he could jumpstart it, somebody like that. And I think that will happen. Adopting Bitcoin as the primary treasury reserve, that's a whole nother kind of leap. And I don't know, how likely that would be, but you do it in small steps, hopefully bigger companies will continue, will jump into the game.
So my question to you would be, if you are talking to a zombie company CEO or large shareholder, would you advise them to only buy Bitcoin and just, do the kind of the first step? Or would you actually tell them, no, go all the way? You should actually do equity ATM. You should issue debt. You should, go the full 9 yards or whatever the saying is. How would you advise them on that?
It's a good question. I think just getting them to buy Bitcoin is a great first step. I don't think they necessarily have to be that all in if they don't want to be. I think my guess is that once they buy a little bit, they'll buy more, and they'll see the merit in doing it. So I'd rather see them just get their feet wet if that's our only option. I actually spend a lot of my time meeting with public companies. A lot of them are zombies. I have meetings all the time part of my as part of running my family office. I meet with public companies and CEOs and CFOs, and I will when I see companies that do have this kind of opportunity, they're sitting on a lot of cash and their stocks have underperformed. I'll often ask them, "What do you think about buying Bitcoin?" And so I have a pretty good antenna into this, and I have to say that's partly why I'm a bit cynical, because most of the time they just laugh at me. They just like, you got to be kidding me. And so when you have these periods where Bitcoin, we're going through this Bitcoin drawdown now. I think it drawed from the highs to the lows to, over the last few days. I think it's like 28% from, its peak. So I think when they see that, they laugh a little even harder at me. When I'm going to a conference next week, I'm going to be meeting with dozens of public companies, and I'm sure that in this kind of environment they'll just want to say I told you so.
The lead sponsor of this show is Bold, the best place to buy, sell, and save Bitcoin. For listeners in the US, Bold lets you secure your financial future with complete peace of mind by integrating a low-fee, Bitcoin-only brokerage with next-gen multi-sig vaults. With Bold, you can smash buy Bitcoin or set a DCA plan for only 0.99% fees and seamlessly deposit the Bitcoin direct to your Bold vault. The Bold Vault is a 2 of 3 collaborative multi-sig where you hold 2 keys and Bold holds 1 as a redundant backup, protecting against loss or theft. You can use Trezor, Ledger, or Cold Card hardware wallets to spin up a Bold Vault in just a few minutes, and the Bold Vault is the only collaborative custody vault available with 0 monthly fees. They're also offering 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys and $25 of free Bitcoin when you buy $100 of Bitcoin or more. Try Bold today and upgrade your stacking experience over at getbold.io. And now, back to the show. Yeah. Also, I'm curious, is it... I'm thinking now of, the Trump and Vance and Zelensky video viral that was going around, and there was kind of much made of, he's disrespecting them. I'm curious on the question of zombie companies. Is it taken as an insult if you say, hey, you're a zombie company, right? Like, is it kind of like you have lost your mojo and you can't do anything better with the capital, so just give up and just buy Bitcoin? Is it seen as like an insult or like a slight to their ego, and maybe that's also why it's hard to move them on that?
Yeah, I think you got to avoid calling them a zombie company to their faces.
So maybe you started in the wrong way, but anyway, go on.
Because it's kind of an indictment of their board and their strategy, and they're obviously fighting to do the right thing, what they think it can increase the value of their company. And so they would be insulted by that. Nobody wants that label. I don't mind having that label because, I came into the company as an activist and recognized that, our performance was not acceptable and that we need to do something about it. And we need to find an alternative path. And it's very hard for a CEO who's often on the board to admit that, because in some cases that CEO is going to get fired,
because they say, hey, you're underperforming, you should have done better, right?
Yeah. So nobody wants to admit they're wrong, and
so it is kind of an identity thing. And look, I think this happened, as I'm sure you and I have seen examples of people, even at the personal level, it's hard for people to just admit they were wrong and say, actually I should have just bought Bitcoin, right? I should have, when you told me years ago to sell this property and just buy Bitcoin, and now, if they listened 5 years later, 10 years later, they would be so much better off, etc. It's the same thing, but just at the company level.
Yeah. And the irony of it is that right now they should be doing it more than this should be happening more frequently than ever, because Bitcoin has sold off a lot, and this is a great opportunity. The irony of that is this is probably kind of reinforcing to them that, see how volatile it is, see how much money we could have lost if we had done this. I'm so glad we didn't listen to you, Eric.
Right.
And so that's the irony. It's always the irony of investing. You always, you want to buy low and sell high, but like it's people, that's not human nature.
Right. It's psychologically difficult to do.
People can't take those type of drawdowns, and it's the people are generally risk averse, and that's that quote about people overestimate risk and underestimate opportunity. I mean, that's exactly where we are right now for Bitcoin Treasury. I think their corporate boards are overestimating risk and underestimating opportunity at a moment where Bitcoin has had a relatively large drawdown for them. Maybe not for Bitcoiners, but for most people, the drawdown from its peak is significant, and it's probably turning these corporate boards off to Bitcoin when it should be turning them on. And that's human nature.
One other question, I guess, putting aside kind of the first two ideas like we mentioned in terms of just buy Bitcoin with your cash and, issue equity ATM and issue debt to buy Bitcoin. On the other side, and I understand maybe you're relatively early at the company level doing Bitcoin strategy or doing a Bitcoin strategy, but when should a company actually deploy Bitcoin in the business? Like try to finance a new venture or expansion or a product or to acquire a competitor or these kinds of... How do you think about that question?
It's a good question. We're really just focused on accumulating Bitcoin because we view it as like an investment. We don't really view it as, something that we should create an operating business out of. We want to stay in our lane and focus on medical, and we have to have working capital in dollars to make that work. Just the way the world is today, our largest customers are not going to probably accept Bitcoin,
Yeah.
and so. And then our vendors and so forth. So it's probably not something that
Yeah.
we realistically can. And by the way, I don't want to let go of any Bitcoin, right? Like we have
Right.
Bitcoin. I just want to have more of it. Like I don't want to let it go. Like I don't want to have to use
Right.
it in the business. And we're in a fortunate spot. Our company doesn't require a lot of capital. We're very capital light. We all of our growth has been organic, and we can like I mentioned earlier, we're starting to get into some new product areas. It's very low capital intensive in investment to do that for us. So most stuff we can do is organic, and when we're successful with a product, we generate very high margins and generate cash flow, which is great because it just feeds into this ability to buy more Bitcoin at a very high yield. So
Yeah.
I think that kind of like where we're at. The question about maybe buying a zombie company is interesting. Maybe I've heard of, I know there are people out there who are looking to do that, to be activists in zombie companies and force them to do a Bitcoin Treasury strategy. That's really appealing to me. I don't know if that's something that Semler we need to do, or we're not looking at doing anything like that. But there's some real I think that could be a really interesting kind of opportunity for people with capital in, institutions with capital to kind of convert these zombie companies into BTC companies, by being kind of acquirers.
Yeah. Now, part of why once you're like really into Bitcoin, you just want to keep accumulating Bitcoin, part of it is the effective hurdle rate as a Bitcoiner is so high, right?
Yes.
Depending on your projections in what you think the future is going to be like, if you're looking at whatever power law or whatever other thing. And okay, yeah, I think even with diminishing returns over the next 10 years, like I think it's quite reasonable that in 10 years Bitcoin could 10x in that time. And then as either as an investor or if you're managing a company, that is going to impose a very strict, I guess, environment for you, because now it's like anything other than Bitcoin is just, it's not going to meet that bar. So how do you think about this question of Bitcoin as the hurdle rate?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the hurdle rate on Bitcoin is so high. I think of it as like 60%. You know? So I think that just makes it almost impossible for us to find anything to buy, especially in the medical area. I mean, if you could buy cash, for free, if you could buy a public company that's trading at a huge, discount and take their cash and buy Bitcoin, that's difficult to do. There's a lot of hurdles to that, with just being, a public company and having to pay a large premium and fighting, the board and so forth. So it's messy, and you're probably better off just buying more Bitcoin and staying, independent. And the only way you could do that is with your stock. You wouldn't want to use your cash to do that because you'd rather put your money into Bitcoin. There's too much uncertainty. Like if you tried that strategy of acquiring something, or, yeah, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't have as clear a picture and visibility into whether you're going to exceed that hurdle rate that Bitcoin offers. So you're better off just sticking with Bitcoin. And there are companies in the stock market that will outperform Bitcoin. It is possible. Like, I mean, we've had some 10xers just in a year in some of these tech stocks, companies like App11, and, there've been incredible Nvidia, there've been some incredible performances. And obviously strategies kind of exceeded most of those, but it's still, there are opportunities. It's just so hard to know. It's like throwing at a dartboard a little bit. And I'd much rather, I have just much more certainty and feeling of, visibility with Bitcoin, ironically, because it's not something that generates cash flows. It's not like your typical company, it's a commodity. And yet it has this, it's so clear to me from this, especially as it compares to gold and the value of gold, and that disparity is increasing, the disparity in value between gold and Bitcoin. And so I think that just makes the upside even more exciting. And I just think as the years go by and our world just becomes more digitized, the concept of owning gold versus Bitcoin is just like, it just becomes even more obvious, especially younger generations, when they like, why would I own this physical, asset in gold when I could own an immutable, digital asset like Bitcoin?
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say that because we're so early in Bitcoin today, and yes, I know it sounds crazy saying that even 16 years in, but yes, we are still early in terms of global adoption. Um, Maybe it changes over time, right? Like 10, 20 years down the line, maybe by then we've sort of seen the tapering down, the diminishing returns. And then at that
Mhm.
point, now
Yeah.
it might make more sense to actually do other things than just hodling and just buying more Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps. Yeah. I think it's so far away we're so far away from being there. It really feels so early to me that I'm just thrilled that we have this opportunity and that we saw it. We didn't see it as early as a lot of people, but we feel like, there's just so much upside and that we're on the right path. And, it even though we were early, we feel like, we're just gonna, we're gonna eventually be so thrilled that we pursued this strategy.
So I've got a couple other questions. So one other idea, we sort of touched on this a little bit, but around saturation, right? The crowded market point that, okay, yes, right now there's not that many Bitcoin treasury companies. So maybe when you go to market with a convertible debt offering, or you've got a decent number of buyers of that. Do you think that changes over time? That like if there were to be 30 Bitcoin treasury companies or 100 Bitcoin treasury companies, do you think there would be sort of a saturation point at that point, or is it's no, actually we're still really early? Like, how are you thinking about that?
That is the capital markets. It ebbs and flows, right? It's like something gets hot, and then everybody plows in, and then they flood the market with these offerings, and not all of them go well, and then it shuts down. That's cyclical. That's capital markets stuff. It's not really so much whether it's Bitcoin or AI or steel. I mean, it doesn't really matter. So like last fall, the convertible market was super hot, especially for Bitcoin companies, because strategy had been so successful, and Michael Saylor had transformed, wealth and fortune for convertible market investors. He had created so much success for people that invested in his converts that it made it easier for others to follow in his footsteps. So you saw a lot of Bitcoin miners going into the convert market, raising capital at a very low cost of capital. And, it just got to the point where, there was one like every day. And then, all of a sudden a few of them don't work out, or some of them come right back to the market after being there, a few weeks earlier, and you've just, you've oversupplied the market, and then it doesn't do as well. And so demand, subsides. And so you got to wait for that to kind of flush itself out. And so that's just capital markets. But yeah, there will be a time when there's all these Bitcoin treasury companies, hopefully sooner rather than later, and they will go to the convert markets. And I think the convert markets will be more discerning. Like they won't just, oh, your Bitcoin treasury strategy? Yeah, here's $100 million. No, I think it's going to be, well, what is your differentiation? Okay, Semler Scientific, they've got a two-pronged strategy. They're a medical business that hopefully generates a lot of cash flow to buy Bitcoin, and they have this Bitcoin treasury strategy. They have some great products in the medical world, and they also have a Bitcoin treasury strategy. I like that story. I'm gonna, and I like their balance sheet, and so I'm going to prefer to invest in that one, just the way you would with all types of companies that go to market. That you have to have a story, and if the story is bland and and redundant, you have a lower chance of being successful raising capital. So you have to stay differentiated. And the way we're going to stay differentiated is by hopefully having a good two-pronged story, and then having the right kind of capital structure to benefit from the rise of Bitcoin.
Yeah. And so I'm also curious if you could explain a little bit in terms of who the typical customer or investor is. You were touching on this a little bit before, where there are some kinds of investors who maybe they have a mandate and they can't just buy Bitcoin themselves. So they have to use one of these options, either buying public equity or buying debt, because maybe that's their mandate. So could you explain a little bit about who, I mean, obviously without, if you're not able to share, but in terms of the type of entities who are interested in buying this?
So these are the biggest entities. These are big mutual funds, right? These are, I won't name names, but they're household names for people that have, that are in mutual funds. They're the largest mutual funds. They're the largest asset management companies, and they have mandates. A lot of them, I think most of them, to if it's a stock fund, they can only own stocks. They can only own certain types of stocks in some of them, right? It could be an international fund. It could be an income fund. It could be a growth fund. So, but these funds have very prescribed rules about what they can invest in, and they run, trillions of dollars of capital. And so that there's just a huge pool of kind of mainstream investment funds that can't buy the ETF. They can't buy any ETFs. They can't buy spot Bitcoin. So, that there's a tremendous potential of money on the sidelines, institutional money on the sidelines for Bitcoin Treasury strategy companies. We've done calls with some of them, and we happen to have, I think right now we have two of them as investors in our fund. Capital Research is an investor in our fund, and Susquehanna is an investor in our fund. And that's publicly revealed. That's why I mentioned their names. But there's not just because they can't invest in Bitcoin doesn't mean they want to invest in Bitcoin. You have to convince them that Bitcoin makes sense, and there's still just a dearth of people at these funds that want exposure to Bitcoin. It's still not it's still the exception to the rule. So you really have to find outside the box thinkers at mutual funds who run these portfolios to want to do this, and it's happening much more slowly than you would expect. And I think, just as an aside, I think that we're this latest drawdown, and there's been a lot of tourist money in Bitcoin, right? There's been a lot of people that kind of have hopped on the bandwagon with the red wave. And these are people that are generally much more risk averse than people that have been in Bitcoin for a while and aren't, used to these types of drawdowns. And so I feel like a lot of them are getting shaken out now. And I think that it just makes that making that case for investing in Bitcoin harder, because you've had kind of this unwind of momentum across the board in the stock market, and Bitcoin's been swept up in that. And so I think that the whole allure of the red wave move in Bitcoin that's kind of what's happening now. Is you're seeing an unwind, and that's good. It's cathartic. It kind of shakes out the weak hands, and then eventually, you can go back to having, more ownership, I hope, by people that have higher conviction in Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, sometimes we get, and this happens every cycle, right? Like, new people who are coming in, they're not as comfortable, they're not as used to dealing with the drawdown, and so now a big drawdown hits and people kind of run off, or but I think it will be interesting to see what happens as more and more of these Bitcoin Treasury companies like yours that do this strategy and then start to show results, right? Like, Michael was out there showing, look how strategy has done versus S&P 500 or against the Mag 7 or against Bitcoin itself, because it's levered. And so once as you started in May 2024, so once you hit your first year, or once you start having like earnings calls and showing, okay, here's where we were then and here's where we are now, then that will start to sort of prove it out. And I guess it will take away the career risk for a lot of people. But if you have any thoughts on, buying through the bear cycle as well, because, Michael was doing that, and I presume you'll be doing that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that we expect that, right? We expect a bear cycle. I think we've had these mini drawdowns. Back in last summer we had a one that I think was close to 30%, 25%. This one's close to 30, and maybe they're nothing compared to what we're going to see in a bear cycle. But we want to be in a position where we can withstand that. I think we are. We have like the debt we have is 5.5 year debt. So it's feels, like I said earlier, just feels like it's not, something, it's not going to be an issue getting through the cycle. And we hope to have a lot more Bitcoin on our balance sheet than we do now, accompanying that debt. So we'll just continue to buy Bitcoin as frequently as we possibly can, using our operating cash flow and using other financing vehicles. And so I'm sure it'll be very painful and wish we had bought lower when it happens, but I don't think we can, I think we just gotta focus on accumulating Bitcoin and not trying to time things so much. I do hear a lot of people saying now, because Bitcoin's more institutionalized, that the drawdowns will be less sharp or less significant. I don't know. I'm not going to assume that. We're just going to be really smart, intelligent, and prudent about adding Bitcoin to our balance sheet, and not putting ourselves in a precarious situation where, our company's at risk or our shareholders are at risk. And again, I'm a large shareholder of the company, so are members of our board, and we all have a lot of skin in the game. So we're not trying to do anything kind of for the short-term pop. We're really just thinking about this in a long-term way, and that's why our debt is structured that way.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great spot to finish up. Any last comment you want to make? What people should think about? I guess we've been talking about zombie companies, so I guess if you had a final pitch for the zombie companies.
Final pitch for the zombie company is that we started on this path just 9-10 months ago, May last year. Our stock right now has more than doubled, which is a great return. At one point, it had almost quadrupled. So, I think that a double with Bitcoin actually down 28% in the last few weeks is pretty good. So if Bitcoin can recover, go up, and as we expect, and we think that over time Bitcoin will exceed the value of gold, which would put it over $1 million per Bitcoin. I think that it makes a lot of sense for others to follow in our footsteps and pursue this strategy. We'll all benefit because Bitcoin's got so much upside.
Fantastic. Well, Eric, it was great chatting with you. Listeners, you can check out Eric online, Semler Eric at x.com and semlerscientific.com. Eric, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Stephan. Enjoyed it.